I never thought my fiancé would betray me with a microphone in his hand and a smile on his face. Of all the people I trusted, of all the promises we made, he was the last person I thought would humiliate me like that. It was supposed to be the happiest night of my life, our engagement party at his family's vineyard. I wore the dress he said he loved, helped his mother arrange the dessert table, even picked out the wine. Everything looked perfect, but instead of a toast, he announced the end of our engagement. Then he introduced the woman he'd been seeing behind my back. She stood beside him like she belonged there. What he didn't know was that I'd seen it coming. And I'd already made my move. This isn't just a story. It's a calculation. And every piece, every lie, every receipt was part of the plan. So stay until the end. And tell me where you're listening from in the comments. I don't remember much about the drive to the vineyard. Just the way the fog clung to the road, soft and stubborn, like it didn't want to let me through. I'd made that drive dozens of times before, but that night, it felt heavier, slower, like something in the air was warning me. But I brushed it off as nerves, or maybe hope. Sometimes those two things feel the same when you want something to work so badly. I got there early. Carter always said I was the punctual one, the planner, the one who thought of everything. He'd laugh when he said it. But there was always something underneath that laugh, something a little bitter, like my preparedness annoyed him more than he let on. I used to think it was admiration. Now I know better. His mother was already fluttering around the tables, giving instructions to the staff even though we'd hired a planner. That's just who she was, Brenda Blackwell, queen of the vineyard, perfectly coiffed, always judging you even when she smiled. She kissed my cheek, told me I looked appropriately elegant, and then motioned for someone to move a lantern 2 inches to the left. I'd been trying to win her over since Carter and I got serious. I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I showed her I belonged, eventually she'd soften. I didn't realize she was never going to open that door not to me. The guests trickled in slowly. Some were Carter's business partners. Some were old college friends I barely remembered meeting. My side was smaller, just my cousin Dante, who's like a brother to me. My best friend Eva, who co-owns our boutique downtown. A few close friends from school. My parents couldn't make it, they live in New Mexico, and my mother was recovering from surgery. I told them not to worry about the trip, that I'd send photos, that I wanted them to rest. I regret that now. Not because I needed them to stop what happened, but because I needed someone in that moment who would look me in the eyes and remind me of who I am. Before he tried to take that from me, Carter arrived late. As usual, it had become a habit lately. Blame it on meetings, traffic, sudden emergencies. But when he walked in, there was something off. His shirt was too crisp. His smile was too tight. And there was someone behind him. A girl, barely old enough to order a drink. She wore a dress too short for the weather, and heels that clicked with too much confidence for someone who didn't belong there. I didn't know her name then, but I know it now. Talia. He said she was just from the office, that she needed a ride, that it wasn't what I thought. He told me that with a straight face while she poured herself a glass of champagne from the bar, and I smiled and nodded, because I'd learned by then that confronting Carter in public always made things worse. We stood beside each other during the appetizers, posed for a few photos, mingled. I could feel Eva watching me from across the garden. Her brows were tight, her jaw set. She could smell something burning before the rest of us even noticed the smoke. Dante stayed close too, checking in with quiet glances. He knew I hated crowds like this. He also knew I never complained. Dinner was served under the canopy lights, long tables, mismatched chairs. It was all supposed to feel rustic and charming. It just felt like a stage. I remember Carter tapping his glass, the delicate clink that silenced the laughter around us. He stood, holding the mic like he was about to propose again. My stomach turned, and then he said it. He said we weren't going to be moving forward with the engagement, that it was no one's fault, that sometimes people grow apart, that he wished me the best. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Then he turned to Talia, told everyone she had opened his eyes, that she made him feel alive again. I watched as people turned toward her, confused, curious. some already reaching for their phones. I heard the whispers start to build around the table, saw Brenda press her lips together in a way that said she knew and didn't care. I stood up slowly, straightened the hem of my dress, walked out through the lavender rows, past the champagne table, past the caterers frozen in place, all the way to the gravel lot. No one followed me, not even him. I sat in my car with the door open, listened to the crickets, felt the cool air settle against my skin. I looked down at my hands, steady in my lap. And I thought, he really believes he broke me just now, but he doesn't know. He doesn't know I saw the first hotel charge 2 months ago, that I watched the passwords change, that I noticed the missing receipts. The gas station stops nowhere near his office. He doesn't know I already moved my savings out of the shared account last month. That Dante drew up the paperwork to separate my boutique legally from any future marital claims. That Eva helped me start inventorying every purchase, every transfer, every gift that could be misinterpreted. He doesn't know that the dress I wore tonight, he didn't buy it. That the ring on my finger, I kept the receipt. That the emails I printed, the screenshots I saved, the phone calls I recorded, they all live in a folder labeled "just in case" tucked inside my safe. He thought he was dropping a bomb. I was just waiting for the right moment to let it explode. So I started the engine, and I drove home slowly. Past the winery gates, past the big oak tree with the tire swing we'd promised our future kids, past the road that led to his apartment downtown. I didn't go back to the house we shared. I went to Eva's. She'd left the porch light on. I walked in, kicked off my shoes, and poured a glass of wine. Not the cheap kind, the one I'd been saving for a special occasion. I stood in her kitchen, barefoot, while she stared at me in silence. She didn't ask what happened. She just handed me a blanket and said, "You ready?" I nodded. I wasn't heartbroken. I was ready. ChatGPT deny Eva didn't ask for details that night, and I didn't offer them. We curled up on opposite ends of her couch, the wine between us, a quiet understanding filling the space. The TV was on, some old cooking show neither of us paid attention to. I kept staring at the way the light flickered on the walls, trying to hold on to the stillness before the storm I knew was coming. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: men, like Carter, never walk away quietly. They want control. Even when they're done pretending to care, and when they lose it, they flail, loudly. The next morning, I woke up early, before the sun. I wasn't used to sleeping in someone else's house, but Eva's spare room felt like a shelter. I padded into the kitchen, barefoot, the hardwood cool beneath my feet. She'd left a note on the fridge in her looping cursive. "Take what you need. Call when ready." I stood there for a moment, the refrigerator humming, and I thought about what came next. Not the emotional part. I'd already grieved this man while I was still living beside him. No, this was about protection, about being methodical, and about making sure he didn't get the last word. I drove to the boutique first. The store was still closed. It was Sunday, but I needed to see it. Needed to be reminded that there was something in my life I'd built with my own hands, untouched by him. The key clicked in the lock, and the familiar chime above the door greeted me like an old friend. I walked through the quiet space, past the mannequins and shelves of scarves I'd folded myself. The scent of vanilla and cedar I'd chosen months ago still lingered. The shop wasn't just a business. It was a record of everything Carter had underestimated in me. I went straight to the back office, pulled out the fireproof box under the filing cabinet. Inside were the documents, signed leases, LLC paperwork, receipts, photos of every shipment. I pulled out a folder labeled "just in case," flipped through the emails I'd printed weeks ago, confirmations from our bank. A copy of the prenup Carter had pressured me to void last year, and I'd refused. That refusal had turned into our first real argument. He said it meant I didn't trust him. I told him it meant I trusted myself. I smiled then. Just a little. He thought he'd planned a dramatic escape, but I had been preparing an exit too. Mine just didn't require a stage or a new girlfriend. By noon, my phone buzzed. It was Bridget, the event planner, Gossip spread faster than fire in this town, and she never could resist being the match. "You okay?" she asked, though her tone was more curious than concerned. "I'm fine," I said. Even though I wasn't sure yet if I believed it, something happened. She hesitated. "You haven't seen his post." Then I hung up and opened my phone. Sure enough, Carter had posted a picture from the Vineyard. He stood beside Talia, smiling like a man who'd just closed a deal. The caption read, "Some endings are actually beginnings, grateful for clarity, growth, and love." I felt it then. Not pain disgust, not because he'd moved on, because he was trying to rewrite the story, paint himself as brave, enlightened, the victim of a mismatched love. I knew what he was doing. He was softening the blow, making it look mutual, trying to get ahead of whatever narrative I might create. But I had no intention of posting anything. I didn't need the internet to know the truth. I just needed the courts. Dante called later that day. I told him everything. He listened, barely interrupting. Just the occasional, and I remember you telling me that. When I finished, he said, "So what do you want to do?" I didn't hesitate. "Protect what's mine. That's all. I'll start drafting," he said. "You already did the hard part. Now it's just paperwork." I hung up and let myself breathe. Eva arrived a few hours later with takeout and 2 pints of ice cream. She didn't say much, just sat beside me while I worked through the details with Dante. When I told her Carter had tried to access our shared account, she raised her eyebrows. "Let me guess." She said, "It was empty." "Almost." I said, "I left enough to keep him from noticing, but nothing he can use now." We both laughed, not loudly, but the kind of laugh that says, "You did good." That night, while Eva slept, I sat at her kitchen table with my laptop. I opened a new folder, labeled it Phase 2. In it, I started dragging copies, bank records, text messages, screenshots. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it because Carter had already proved what he was willing to do when he thought I wasn't looking. I read back through the texts he'd sent over the last few months, things that seemed small then but felt clearer now. Running late again. Dinner without me. Need you to send that transfer. Forgot to pay rent again. Let's skip the financial advisor meeting. Too many cooks in the kitchen. Each one was like a breadcrumb on the path to betrayal, and I had every single one. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I hope you're not making this harder than it needs to be." I stared at the screen. No name, but I knew who it was. Carter had blocked me after the party, probably assuming I'd chase him for answers. When I didn't, he used another number. Typical. I didn't reply, just added it to the folder. Then I powered off my phone, slid it across the table, and poured myself a glass of water. He thought I'd scream, that I'd beg, that I'd chase him, cry, rage, make a scene. But I wasn't going to give him that, because when someone throws you away like trash, you don't prove your worth by crawling after them. You prove it by building something so strong, they can't even dent it. And I was just getting started. Monday morning came cold and gray, the kind of morning that makes everything feel heavier than it should. I woke up before the alarm, blinking into the soft light spilling through Eva's linen curtains. For a moment, I thought I was back in our house, his house, but then I felt the space beside me, the stillness of being alone, and I remembered. I took a long shower, not to relax, but to clear the fog in my head. This wasn't about healing yet. This was still the part where everything could unravel if I wasn't careful, the calm before the next hit. Downstairs, Eva had already made coffee. She handed me a travel mug and a soft pat on the shoulder. "You know what you're doing," she said. "He's the one who's flailing." I nodded. Though I didn't feel strong, I just felt ready. By 9. I was sitting across from Dante at his firm's office, the same one where we'd finalized my boutique's operating agreement last year. That had been a good day. Carter had joked about how official everything sounded, about how I didn't trust love anymore. I remember forcing a smile then, because I didn't have the language yet to say, it's not about trust, it's about being smart. Dante was already deep into the paperwork. He didn't waste time with small talk. That's why I'd always liked him more than my own brothers. He was sharp, steady, and never sugarcoated anything, especially not betrayal. He's going to try to claim partial ownership of the boutique, he said, flipping through a manila folder, not because he's entitled to it, he's not, but because it's the only card he thinks he has left. I nodded slowly. I've got records. Every dollar, every expense, every decision, he wasn't involved in any of it. I know. Dante said, that's why we're not reacting. We're going to be methodical. Cold. Let him come to us with his mess. We outlined next steps, filing a protective order on the business assets, flagging the shared accounts for monitoring, formally withdrawing his name from the emergency contact list on my insurance and lease. It felt strange. Untangling a life like that, like pulling thread from a sweater you once loved, but the sweater didn't fit anymore, and the thread, it had started to strangle. By the time I left the office, my phone had 5 new messages. 3 were from an unknown number. 1 was from Brenda Blackwell, and the last was from a blocked number, which I could only assume meant Carter had burned through the burner. I read the first unknown message. You're making a scene out of something that didn't need to be messy. Then another. You should be grateful I handled it with class. And the last, Talia thinks you're unstable. Don't make this worse for yourself. I deleted them, not out of weakness, out of control. But Brenda's voicemail, I listened to that one, even though I knew I shouldn't. Hello, Natalie. I imagine you're feeling embarrassed right now, but I wanted to offer some perspective. Carter was under a lot of pressure, and Talia, well, she's been a good influence on him. Perhaps this is for the best. I do hope we can resolve everything quietly. She ended the message without a goodbye, the same way she used to leave rooms after speaking to me at family dinners like I was a phase her son would eventually outgrow. I stared at the floor for a long moment, clutching the phone in both hands. Then I played the message again, this time on speaker. I wanted to hear how it sounded aloud. I wanted to make sure the tone, the cold, deliberate tone, was exactly how I remembered. I opened my laptop and saved the audio file, labeled it clearly. I wasn't just building a case anymore. I was building a record, a trail, a story that couldn't be rewritten by anyone else. That afternoon, I went back to the boutique. I hadn't planned to, but something inside me needed to step into that space. I needed to be reminded of what I'd built, what was mine. Eva was there, steaming new arrivals near the front window. She gave me a long look but didn't ask questions, just said, "Inventory came early. You'll love the new handbags." I smiled and walked past her, into the back office, and sat down at the desk where I'd made 1,000 decisions Carter had never cared to ask about. I opened the spreadsheet that tracked our sales for the year, watched the numbers rise across the rows. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I sent a message to our website developer, asked him to prepare a press kit, something sleek and professional. Something that told the story of the boutique's growth, our mission, our next steps. I wanted to be ready. For media, for opportunities. For people who might come looking not for gossip, but for inspiration. At 3:17 that afternoon, my phone buzzed again, a new number. FYI, Carter's trying to say the boutique was his idea. He told my cousin you just ran it, that he funded it. It was from Bridget. Of course it was. She was always first to the fire. I didn't respond, but I copied the message and saved it. He was moving fast now, trying to plant stories, rewrite history, reframe the narrative before he lost control, but he was too late. I'd already pulled the receipts. Every loan, every invoice, every single business credit card was in my name. Every photo of us standing in the boutique together, his hands in his pockets, bored, disengaged. Like he was humoring me. He never saw it as his future. He saw it as my hobby. Something to keep me occupied while he built a legacy. I stepped outside around 5. The sky was beginning to shift, that dusty golden hour that makes everything look softer, more forgiving. Eva joined me, holding 2 cups of tea. "Want to talk about it?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. And she didn't push, just handed me the tea and sat beside me on the concrete steps. We watched a few customers leave, waving goodbye as the bell above the door chimed. You know, Eva said quietly. He really thought he was the main character in your life. I laughed. The sound surprised me, not because it wasn't real, but because it felt like mine again. I don't think he ever read the script. I said. We sat in silence after that, comfortable, calm, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than dread settle inside me. I felt ready, not just to defend myself, but to win. The following morning, the boutique was quiet before opening, just the faint hum of the heater and the subtle clink of hangers as Eva restocked the new arrivals. I sipped my coffee slowly, standing near the front window, watching the town come alive one car at a time. Everything looked normal on the outside, but inside, the wheels were already turning. By 9:30, the first sign of the next wave of fallout arrived. A customer middle-aged, familiar face, always chatty, came in for a return, but this time she lingered. Her voice dropped. I heard what happened at the Vineyard, she said gently. Small town. News travels fast. I nodded, not offering much. She tilted her head, lips pursed in something that wasn't quite pity. Men like that always think they're smarter than they are. But women like you're never really caught off guard. It wasn't a question. And I didn't correct her. I just folded the scarf she'd returned and placed it in the bin for steaming. The truth was, people were starting to talk, and not just behind closed doors. That afternoon, one of our stylists rushed in late from lunch, flushed and flustered. "Did you see Juliana's post?" she asked. Breathless, I froze. "What post?" She showed me on her phone. Juliana Carter's sister had posted a photo from the Vineyard party. Carefully cropped, in the caption, she'd written family first. When people show you who they really are, believe them. It wasn't subtle, and the comments, even worse. Her friends chiming in with things like, "You never liked her anyway." And some people just aren't built for our kind of life. I didn't comment, didn't like it. Just saved a screenshot and emailed it to myself. Subject line Phase 2, reputation push. Because I knew what they were doing. They were soft launching a narrative, painting me as bitter, unstable, a girl who didn't belong in their wine-soaked world. They weren't trying to fix anything. They were just trying to distance themselves from the fallout. At lunch, Eva slid into the seat across from me in the break room, holding her phone. Juliana's fishing for sympathy. She muttered, "She's either deflecting from Carter or laying the groundwork for when it all crumbles. Both." I said quietly, "Probably both." Eva leaned back. "You know this could actually help us, right? The more they talk, the easier it is to track the story they're trying to build. And if they're building something fake, well, we've got receipts." I nodded. My folder had grown thicker by the day. Emails, texts, timestamps, transactions, and now screenshots, public statements, everything dated, everything preserved. Later that day, I got a call from a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked it, I almost laughed. It was Brenda again. "I'd appreciate it if you stopped involving outsiders in what is clearly a personal matter," she said. "There's no need to escalate things. You're only making this harder for yourself." She didn't mention Carter, or what he'd done, or the fact that he left me standing alone at my own engagement party. No, to her. The problem was me reacting, me refusing to shrink. I saved that message too. Around 4:00, a man in a tailored coat walked into the boutique. He had the look of someone who didn't usually shop here, clean-shaven, distracted, uncomfortable, surrounded by silk and chiffon. I approached gently. "Can I help you find something?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, I'm looking for Natalie Ruiz." "I'm Natalie." He offered his hand. "Sam Whitaker. I'm with the Press Ledger. I've been following your business since last spring." I blinked. "You're the one who featured us in the Small Business Spotlight." He nodded. "That was me. And I've got to say, your numbers have been impressive since then, especially recently. I was hoping to schedule a follow-up talk growth. Future plans. Your expansion." I hesitated, unsure. Sam noticed. "I'm not here to dig into what happened at the Vineyard. That's not our angle. This is about the business." After a pause, I said quietly, Give me a few days. I'll think about it. He smiled again, this time warmer. Take your time, but I hope you'll let people see what you've built, especially now, when he left. Eva raised an eyebrow. You're getting press requests now, I shrugged. Looks like it. She tilted her head. You should do it. I might, I said. But on my terms, that night, back at Eva's place. I opened the news. The Ledger had published a brief mention of Carter's firm being audited. Not front page, but enough to cause discomfort. The article cited anonymous sources suggesting discrepancies in personal and professional expenses. It didn't name names, but the comments section filled in the blanks. I clicked through slowly. The lines between his work life and personal chaos starting to blur. I wondered if Brenda was calling the office too, trying to spin control like she always did, but this wasn't a family dinner. This was public now. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. You're embarrassing yourself. You should have just walked away with grace. Another buzz. Talia says this is why we couldn't grow together. You were always too cold. And another. You think your little shop matters, that press stuff won't save you. I forwarded all three to Dante with the simple subject line, escalation, documentation. He replied within the hour, keep sending them. Everyone helps. I powered down my phone for the night, feeling tired in a way I couldn't name, not just physically, soul tired, like every part of me was pulling double duty surviving while strategizing. Eva found me on the porch, a blanket around my shoulders. They're scrambling, she said softly. You're steady. That scares people like them. I looked up at the sky. The stars were faint behind a thin cloud cover, like they were still there, just a little harder to see. I don't want to be at war forever, I whispered. You won't be, Eva said. But while you are, win. And I would. Quietly. Thoroughly. Because what they didn't understand was that I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I was just making sure they couldn't destroy me. It was Friday morning when I finally heard Carter's voice again, not through a text or a voicemail, but in person. I was at the boutique, rearranging a display near the front when I looked up and saw him through the glass. He stood just outside the door, hands in his pockets, that familiar half smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, the same one he wore when he thought he had the upper hand. For a split second, I froze, not out of fear, not even out of anger, just a moment of disorientation. Seeing someone I used to wake up beside now standing outside like a stranger. He didn't knock, just opened the door and walked in, like nothing had changed. Busy morning, he asked, glancing around. Eva, standing at the register, stiffened. She didn't speak, just folded her arms and watched him. Silent as stone. I'm just here to talk, he said quickly, hands up like he was expecting a fight. I walked over slowly. Calm, controlled. You have a lawyer, I said. If there's something that needs discussing, you can use him. Carter gave a little laugh, like I was being dramatic. Come on, Nat. This doesn't need to get uglier than it already is. I didn't blink. It's not ugly. It's documented. His eyes narrowed. Just a flicker. I get that you're hurt. I do. But dragging this into court, lawyers freezing accounts. It's overkill. No, I said, my voice even. What you did at the Vineyard was overkill. What I'm doing is protection. He looked around the boutique, and for a second, something shifted in his expression. I realized then he'd never really seen this place before. Not really. Not as mine. Not as something built from the ground up, without his help. He always thought of it as my little side project, something to keep me busy while he played Empire. I want to make you an offer, he said. Half the business profits. You keep the rest. I blinked, slowly. You think you're entitled to half. I've supported you. I've helped you mock this place. You called it my hobby. You refused to come to the launch party. And I have the texts. Carter. You told people I was clinging to a fantasy. He didn't deny it, just sighed, like I was being unreasonable. You know how these things work, he said. Everything gets messy. Family, friends. Do we really want to air all this out? You already aired it out, I said, publicly, at our engagement party. That hit him. I could tell. The bravado slipped just slightly, like a mask that cracked around the edges. I was trying to do it clean, he mumbled, better than ghosting. Right, I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Eva stepped closer, subtle but firm. You're done here, she said quietly. Carter looked at her, then back at me. You're gonna let her speak for you now. I walked to the door, held it open. Leave. He stared at me for a moment longer, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he walked out, muttering something under his breath I didn't bother to catch. I locked the door behind him. My hands didn't shake. Eva looked at me. We need to document that visit. I already am, I said. Pulling out my phone, I opened my notes app and typed everything I could remember: his words, his tone, the time he arrived and left. I took a screenshot of the security camera footage, sent it all to Dante within the hour, exactly what I expected. Dante replied, "We'll use it. Keep everything." That weekend, I sat down with Sam Whitaker, the journalist from the Press Ledger. I'd hesitated, worried it would come across as petty or performative, but the more they tried to paint me as unstable, the more I realized I had every right to tell my story on my terms. We met at a quiet cafe on the north end of town, away from the boutique and its whispers. He brought a small recorder, a notebook, and the kind of demeanor that made you feel like you were just chatting with a friend. I'm not interested in the gossip. He told me up front, I'm interested in how a woman takes a public betrayal and turns it into power. I took a breath. Then I started to talk. I told him about the boutique, the long nights, the handmade displays, the way I budgeted every penny because I didn't have a safety net, how I built something out of nothing while the man beside me took credit for dreams he never touched. Sam asked about the party. Of course, I didn't give him the drama, just the facts, just enough to understand the fracture. Then I pivoted. Talked about business growth, expansion plans, our local partnerships. My voice steadied with each sentence. I watched him scribble notes, nod, smile. At the end, he said something I hadn't expected. You know, most people would have disappeared after something like that, gone silent. You didn't. I couldn't. I said, if I went quiet, they'd own the story. When the article came out 3 days later, it wasn't about Carter, it was about me. Boutique owner turns betrayal into business breakthrough. The photos were tasteful, the quotes were measured, and the response overwhelming. Customers came in just to shake my hand. One woman hugged me and said, "He doesn't get to define you. That's not how this ends." Orders spiked online. We had to restock 3 items by Thursday. Eva looked at me and said, "You know he's fuming right now," but I didn't care. Because for the first time in weeks, I wasn't reacting. I was rising. That night, back at Eva's, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the porch, and let the breeze wash over me. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd quietly protected. My name, my business, my dignity. And in that quiet, I realized something else. I hadn't just survived Carter's betrayal, I'd outgrown it. It started with an envelope on the boutique's welcome desk. No postage, no return address. Just my name in sloppy handwriting. Eva found it first, brought it to the back office without saying a word. She didn't have to. I already knew it wasn't good. Inside was a letter, typed, with a signature that looked rushed, almost embarrassed. It was from Brenda Blackwell. She wrote that she was disheartened by the public attention I'd invited, that my attempts to exploit a private matter for personal gain were damaging Carter's reputation, and by extension, their families. She urged me to show grace and withdraw any pending legal action. And at the bottom, in handwriting, she'd added, "We expected better from you." Natalie, I sat with it for a long while, not angry, not even surprised, just exhausted by the audacity, the way they spoke of damage as if it hadn't been done to me first, as if the public wasn't reacting to Carter's actions. But to my response, I folded the letter neatly, slid it into a folder labeled MISC Hostility, and sent a scanned copy to Dante. He called me 2 hours later. "She's nervous," he said plainly. That means we're making progress. What now, I asked. We finalize your petition, serve him formally, and then we file for a motion to protect your business income from future claims. His side will likely escalate once they see how strong your case is. I sighed. And if they go public, let them, he said. We've got the truth, and more importantly, we've got documentation. That same day, Talia posted a photo on her social media, her alone, standing in front of a mirror. The caption read, "Choosing peace means walking away." No mention of Carter, no ring, no Vineyard. Within an hour, one of our stylists told me she'd changed her relationship status to single. Quietly. No announcement, no drama. Just changed. I didn't feel triumphant. If anything, I felt something closer to sympathy. Not for Carter, but for the version of Talia I imagined she might have been young, hopeful, naive enough to think betrayal always came with fireworks and confessions, not slow disintegration and bank withdrawals. By the weekend, the tone from Carter's side had shifted again. Juliana posted a story with a quote about toxic women weaponizing victimhood. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. People knew. And yet, the more they tried to diminish me, the more customers came in, not out of pity, but out of solidarity. Women who'd been through worse. Women who'd been silenced longer. Women who saw in my restraint a kind of quiet power they weren't used to seeing in headlines. One customer came in and lingered near the handbag display. She picked up a bag, traced the stitching with her finger, then looked up at me. "My husband drained our savings last year," she said softly. "Ran off with a woman from the gym. Everyone told me not to make a fuss, that it would only make things worse. You know what made things worse? I waited, not making a fuss. She bought the bag, paid in cash, and left with a nod that felt like a blessing. Later that night, I got another voicemail. This time, from Carter himself. He sounded different, not smug, not angry, just small. "I think we should talk," he said. "This has gone too far. I know you're hurt, and maybe I didn't handle things right, but dragging this out isn't good for either of us. Let's settle quietly. Call me." I didn't call. I forwarded it to Dante. He texted back. He's feeling the pressure. It's working. But something else was happening too. I started dreaming again. Not about Carter, but about my boutique. The future. Expansion. Before the fallout. I'd been hesitant. I was afraid of taking on too much, of overextending. Carter had always made it sound like I should be grateful for what I had, not push for more. That ambition was arrogance, that dreaming big was a setup for disappointment. But now, the ceiling felt higher, the air felt clearer. I started researching spaces in the next town over, quietly, carefully. I even visited one. Eva came with me. It was a little sun-drenched storefront near a park, with high ceilings and exposed brick. The rent wasn't cheap, but it wasn't impossible. I stood in the middle of the empty space, sunlight warming my face, and imagined a future that had nothing to do with him. No shared finances, no second-guessing, no begging for support that should have come willingly. Just me. And what I'd built, I didn't sign anything that day, but I took photos, measured the windows, made a list. When I got back to the boutique, another message was waiting, this time from Carter's attorney. It was a notice that he was challenging my claim that the boutique was separate property. He was now asserting that he'd provided strategic guidance and emotional labor, and that his reputation had contributed to the business's success. I read it 3 times, slowly, and then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic and desperate and wrong. I walked to the back room, opened the file drawer, and pulled out the binder with every photo, date, invoice, and email since day one. Every decision, every dollar, every supplier contract in my name, every brand partnership sealed long before he ever stepped foot in the boutique. He never contributed strategy. He never folded a scarf. He never even learned the names of the brands I carried. I scanned the letter, added it to the file labeled Claims, Defense, and emailed Dante everything. He replied almost instantly. Let them talk. We have the paper trail. By the end of the week, Carter's firm had suspended him pending internal review. Apparently, his personal expenses had started to bleed into company cards, hotel stays, spa charges, wine orders labeled as client meetings that never happened. Word traveled fast. Customers mentioned it under their breath. Vendors asked if I needed help relocating. Old friends messaged me with quiet apologies, people who'd once believed his version of the story. I didn't respond to most of them, not out of spite, but because I didn't need validation anymore. I knew the truth. And I had built something that didn't need their approval to stand. That weekend, I stood outside the boutique just after closing. The windows glowed behind me, the shelves were stocked, the floors gleamed. I looked down at the keys in my hand, and I realized this wasn't the life Carter left me with. This was the life I protected, while he tried to burn it down. The emergency hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday. Rain had rolled in overnight, not a downpour, but the kind of cold drizzle that soaked you slowly if you weren't paying attention. I wore a black wool coat, low heels, and pulled my hair back into a tight, clean bun. Nothing flashy, nothing soft. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to protect. Eva offered to come, but I told her no. Dante would be there. And truthfully, I didn't want anyone watching, not even someone who loved me. I needed space to walk in fully as myself, not the girl he left, not the woman everyone pitied or whispered about. I needed to be the business owner, the strategist, the woman who had receipts. Dante met me at the courthouse steps. He handed me a copy of the filing papers and gave me a small nod. You've already done everything right, he said. Today, we just make it official. Inside the courtroom, Carter sat beside a lawyer I didn't recognize, young, flashy, smug. Carter wore a navy blazer that didn't quite fit and shoes I remembered from last year, the ones he bought after a long meeting downtown, claiming they'd help him look the part. I guess that hadn't worked out. Talia wasn't with him. Brenda wasn't either. I wondered if they'd finally stopped pretending this whole thing could be cleaned up with charm and good posture. The judge was a woman, mid-50s, sharp eyes, no patience for nonsense. That comforted me more than I expected. Carter's lawyer opened with a statement about how emotion and vengeance had clouded my judgment, that Carter had been fully supportive of his fiancée's dreams and was now being punished publicly for private decisions. He emphasized Carter's good intentions, spoke about shared vision, emotional investment, and a phrase I hadn't heard before, intangible marital contribution. Dante stood slowly when it was our turn. Your Honor, he said, voice calm but precise. We are not here today to argue emotions. We are here to examine facts. He held up a thick binder, one I'd spent weeks compiling. This, he continued, is a documented history of Ms. Ruiz's business legal registrations in her name, contracts signed independently, financial records showing exclusive deposits from her personal account. There is no record of any financial or managerial contribution from Mr. Blackwell. In fact, in several text messages submitted as evidence, Mr. Blackwell refers to Ms. Ruiz's business as a hobby and a distraction. He paused, letting the words settle. In those same messages, he mocks her work, questions its legitimacy, and explicitly distances himself from any involvement. The judge looked down at the copies in front of her. She flipped through a few pages, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at Carter. Mr. Blackwell, do you deny referring to Ms. Ruiz's business as a little shop? Carter shifted uncomfortably. I may have said that, but I didn't mean it in a negative way. She raised an eyebrow. You also wrote, and I quote, "At least you'll have your little shop to keep you busy in your old age." Would you describe that as supportive? Carter opened his mouth, then closed it again. Dante continued, in addition to financial separation, Ms. Ruiz has submitted evidence of Mr. Blackwell's admitted depletion of joint funds, use of shared credit accounts for personal travel with another party, and attempts to manipulate public perception to discredit her character and minimize her business's value. He stepped back. We are requesting full legal protection of her assets and an injunction against further public statements from Mr. Blackwell or his family regarding the business, pending final settlement. Carter's lawyer stammered through a rebuttal, claiming emotional distress, that Carter had acted rashly but out of heartbreak, and that I was weaponizing documentation to control the narrative, but the judge wasn't buying it. She tapped her pen against the desk and said, "This is not about heartbreak. This is about integrity and accountability." She turned to me next. Ruiz, she said. "Have you been pressured to document your finances this thoroughly?" "No, Your Honor," I replied, voice steady. "I did it because I knew no one else would protect what I built." She nodded once, and then she ruled. All assets under the boutique's name were confirmed as separate property. The joint account funds Carter had drained were to be repaid in full within 30 days. His access to shared lines of credit was revoked permanently. He was barred from making any public claims regarding ownership of the boutique until final settlement. I stood there as the judge finalized the ruling, feeling a strange kind of quiet wrap around me. Not relief exactly, more like an exhale that had waited too long to come. Carter didn't look at me as I left the courtroom, but I heard his voice behind me, muttering to his lawyer. Something about unfairness. Something about me always being calculating. I didn't stop walking. Outside. The rain had slowed to a mist. The street smelled like wet asphalt and something faintly floral. I stood under the overhang for a moment, watching cars pass. Dante stepped beside me, holding his umbrella low. "You handled that perfectly," he said. "I was just honest." I said. He smiled a little. "That's what makes it perfect." Back at the boutique, Eva was waiting with a bottle of sparkling water and a slice of chocolate cake from the cafe next door. "I figured we'd celebrate small today," she said. I laughed softly. "That's all I need." The rest of the day passed quietly. Customers filtered in, unaware or unconcerned with the court hearing. I answered emails, rearranged a display table, and checked in on an order delay. Life moved forward, steady and familiar. Later that evening, I checked my phone. There was a message from someone I hadn't expected. "Talia." It was short. I left him. "I'm sorry for everything. You didn't deserve that." I stared at it for a while. Then I closed it. I didn't need her apology, but part of me hoped she meant it not for me, but for herself. Sometimes walking away is the best apology you can give to the woman who came before you. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen, made a simple dinner, and sat by the window as the mist turned into fog again. I thought about everything that had happened, every insult, every manipulation, every lie wrapped in charm, and I thought about that courtroom, the way Carter shrank under scrutiny, the way my records had spoken louder than his defense. This wasn't just about winning. This was about being ready when the truth was finally asked to speak, and I was. A week after the hearing. The momentum hadn't slowed, it just changed shape. The court order had been made official. The money Carter drained was now due in full. My boutique, my finances, my name, they were all protected, locked down tight like they should have been from the start. But the calls, they kept coming. Not from Carter, not anymore. He'd gone silent, at least with me. But his family, that was another story. It started with Amanda, his sister. She showed up at the boutique unannounced, sunglasses on, as if she were the one hiding from something. "I just want to talk," she said softly, lingering near the scarves. Eva caught the edge in my expression and quietly disappeared into the back room. I didn't tell her to go. She just knew I'd need space. Amanda picked up a silk wrap, fingers trembling slightly. She looked thinner than I remembered, maybe more tired. Maybe less convinced she was standing on the right side. "I know we didn't support you," she said. "I know we looked the other way, but I saw the court ruling, Bussy. I saw the statements. I saw the way he tried to twist it all. And I'm sorry." She looked up at me, eyes glossed over but holding steady. "I believed him when he said you were cold, controlling, that you kept secrets. But reading what he did with your account, seeing it in black and white, it made me sick." I nodded. Not because I forgave her, but because I understood the feeling, that sinking twist in your gut when you realize you backed the wrong story. It was easier to believe him. I said, "It always is." "Until it isn't." She nodded slowly, folded the scarf, and left without buying anything. Later that afternoon, Brenda called. This time, she didn't leave a voicemail. Just a missed call, and then a text. I raised him better than this. At least I thought I did. I didn't respond. Because remorse that only comes after exposure isn't remorse. It's reputation control. That weekend, Eva and I stayed late to reorganize the back room. Inventory had exploded ever since the article ran in the press ledger. We were restocking faster than we could shelve. I'd hired a part-time assistant to help with packaging, and a younger stylist who reminded me a little too much of myself at 23, all nerves and dias and excitement. Around 8. Eva opened a box of handbags and whistled low. "We're going to need more space," she said. "This is getting out of hand." I smiled, dusting off a new shipment. Good kind of problem. Though, she nodded. "You ever think about the second location again?" I paused. After the hearing. I'd driven back to that little storefront near the park, the one with the brick and the high windows. It was still vacant, still sunlit, still whispering possibility. "I think I'm ready," I said. "Really ready." Eva grinned. "I'll draft a floor plan," I laughed, feeling something rise in me that hadn't been there in months. Hope, not cautious, not conditional, just clean, unfiltered hope. By Monday, I had signed the lease, quietly, no press release, no big announcement, just a new set of keys and a long exhale. The day after that, I received a package at the boutique. No name, no sender. Inside was a stack of papers, a printed list of every financial document Carter had ever tried to dispute, annotated in someone else's handwriting. Talia. There was no note, just the documents, neatly sorted, and a small flash drive at the bottom of the box. I didn't plug it in right away. I wasn't even sure I wanted to know what was on it, but I called Dante, just in case. He scanned the drive for viruses, then opened it on a secure laptop. It was full of screenshots, conversations, texts between Carter and colleagues, expense breakdowns, one folder labeled promised reimbursements. "That's your nail," Dante said simply. "It's over." But it wasn't just evidence, it was validation. From the very woman he left me for, the one he paraded through a vineyard and across social media like a prize. Apparently, that prize came with receipts, too. Later that week, Eva and I held a small event at the boutique, a thank you for loyal customers. Nothing big, just cider, cookies, and quiet conversation. Women came in with stories of their own. One had left a 20-year marriage. Another had just filed for divorce from a man who hadn't worked in 5 years but controlled all the money. They talked about their fear, their freedom, their mistakes, and their strength. "You gave me the courage to do it," one woman whispered to me. "When I read your story, I stopped feeling stupid. I stopped blaming myself. I thanked her. But what I wanted to say was same, because in their voices, I heard my own shame unraveling. We closed late that night. Eva and I stood at the counter, counting the till. She looked over at me. "You okay?" I thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I am." That night, I lit a candle, opened a journal, and wrote the words I hadn't let myself write in months. He didn't break me. He freed me. He just didn't mean to. I slept well for the first time in a long time, until morning brought one more surprise. A legal email. Subject line: motion to revisit asset division filed by Carter Blackwell. My stomach sank. It was one more attempt, one last desperate lunge. He was claiming the media attention around the boutique had inflated its value and that he was entitled to post-separation gains. I forwarded it to Dante. He called almost immediately, laughter in his voice. "Let him try," he said. "It'll be dismissed in 2 minutes, just more desperation." I breathed in slow, out even slower. He wasn't finished yet, but he was running out of moves, and I was no longer on defense. The judge didn't even let his lawyer finish. It was a Friday morning. gray skies again. And I was seated across from Dante at the courthouse for what was supposed to be Carter's last stand. He'd filed a motion to revisit the division of assets, insisting my boutique's rising popularity, what he called unexpected public exposure, was partly due to the shared brand we once had as a couple. The argument was thin, almost laughable, but they still filed it. The courtroom was quiet when the judge reviewed the motion. She flipped through the pages like they bored her, occasionally glancing over her glasses with that same unimpressed expression she wore at the last hearing. "Mr. Blackwell," she said finally, "you are suggesting that Ms. Ruiz's success in the months following your separation is somehow yours to share." His lawyer tried to jump in something about mutual public identity, whatever that meant. But the judge held up her hand. "Your client humiliated Ms. Ruiz publicly, withdrew shared funds without consent, used joint accounts to fund personal travel with another partner, and attempted to discredit her ownership of a business he now claims to have contributed to after the fact. This court sees no grounds to revisit asset division." She didn't even pause. "Motion denied. Mr. Blackwell is additionally ordered to pay the legal costs incurred by Ms. Ruiz in defending against this petition." I heard Carter exhale hard beside his attorney. It wasn't just the financial blow, it was the official, legal confirmation that he had no foothold left, no angle to work, no loophole to crawl through. He looked older than the last time I saw him in court, less polished. The blazer from before was wrinkled now, and his hair had grown out in a way that looked more forgotten than styled. He didn't make eye contact with me as I stood and walked out. I didn't need him to. Outside. Dante patted my shoulder. "That was the last swing. He's out of plays." "Let's hope he knows that." Dante gave a tired smile. "Even if he doesn't. The court does." That afternoon, I returned to the boutique and found a package waiting for me on the back counter. This one wasn't anonymous. The return label said it all Melissa Wright. Blackwell Vineyards, Carter's mother. Inside was a scarf, one of ours an older design, soft blue silk, the kind she used to admire. Wrapped around it was a note written on heavy stationery. "I won't pretend I always understood you. Natalie, but I watched you handle yourself with more grace than anyone deserved to expect. I may not have raised a perfect son, but I raised a woman who survived him. Thank you for teaching me the difference between enabling and supporting." I read it twice, then folded it, placed it in a drawer in the back office, and stared out the window for a long time. It wasn't an apology, but it was something, a shift, an acknowledgement, however late, that I had been right to protect myself even when no one else did. That weekend, I visited the new location again, this time with Eva and our new assistant manager, Julia. The space was still being painted, but it already felt like ours. We walked through slowly, measuring displays, talking color schemes and shelving. "I never thought I'd see you in two places at once," Eva said, nudging me gently with her elbow. "I didn't either," I replied. But maybe that's because I was always looking through someone else's lens. Carter had taught me how to prepare for disappointment, but what he didn't realize was that he'd also taught me how to survive it, and that surviving wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of the next one. A few days later, Sam from the press ledger called again. His voice was excited. "I just got off the phone with a producer from a podcast that focuses on women in business." He said, "They want to interview you, talk about your growth, your strategy, your legal foresight. They don't want the gossip, they want the grit." I hesitated for only a second. "I'll do it," I said, "but not because of him. I want women to hear what protection actually looks like." The interview was recorded in a quiet studio. The host soft-spoken but sharp. She asked questions about my background, my early days in retail, the choice to separate my personal finances, and the emotional toll of having to build a safety net while pretending everything was fine. "You didn't retaliate," she said at one point. "You responded, strategically, methodically. Some might even say, peacefully." I smiled. Sometimes peace is choosing to let someone self-destruct without following them into the fire. The episode aired a week later and took off faster than I expected. orders poured in again. But what meant more were the messages. A woman wrote, "You helped me find the courage to leave after 31 years. Another said, "I never thought of opening a separate account until I heard your story. Now I feel safer." And another, "I listened with my daughter. She's 17. She said, 'Mom, that lady's not scared of anyone. Thank you for that.'" I printed out those messages, tucked them into a folder labeled Reasons. Carter never messaged again. Not directly, but mutual acquaintances told me he'd moved out of his condo and into a small studio above a garage, that he'd taken a lower-paying job after the firm cut his position, that he still blamed the court and social media backlash for what happened, not his choices, not his actions. But the consequences he thought he'd never have to face. The final confirmation came from Bridget the planner, who always seemed to know everyone's business before they did. "He told someone at the wine bar he's thinking about starting over," she said, smirking. "Wants to write a book about being misunderstood." I laughed, not out of malice, just amazement. He still thinks he's the hero. I said. Bridget shrugged. Some men never grow out of the mirror stage. That night, I went back to the boutique after closing. I turned off the lights, walked the floor slowly. Everything was in place, everything humming with its own quiet rhythm. Before locking up, I walked to the back office, opened the drawer with the scarf Brenda had returned, and placed something beside it. A copy of the court order, highlighted, sealed. Because this wasn't just a story of loss, it was the receipt. And I was keeping it. The 5-year anniversary of the boutique arrived on a crisp October morning. The leaves had just started turning, gold and rust spinning softly to the ground outside our front windows. Eva came in early, arms full of pastries, her sweater dusted with flour from the bakery she'd stopped at on the way. We didn't need decorations. The shop itself had become something of a landmark, now elegant, calm, unmistakably curated. The original wood floors shined. The fall display sat like art in the front window, and the music drifting through the speakers was low, warm, familiar. Every inch of this place told a story, and every square foot was mine. We weren't planning anything elaborate, just a quiet event for regulars, a thank you, a gentle celebration of everything we'd built, not from spite, but from survival. And then, from grace. That was important to me. That no one walked through these doors thinking we'd made something from bitterness. We'd made it from intention. Around noon, I stood behind the counter, folding tissue paper with practiced hands. When the bell above the door chimed, it took a second to register her face, older now, but unmistakable, perfectly tailored coat, silk scarf, one of ours, from the winter collection 2 years back. Melissa Wright, Brenda, Carter's mother. She looked around slowly, taking in the boutique as if it were a museum, not a place she once dismissed as a nice distraction. When our eyes met, she gave a tight smile, not fake, not warm either, just careful. "I wasn't invited," she said quietly. I didn't say anything, just nodded once. She walked toward me, slow and measured, until she stood across the counter, her voice lowered, softer than I'd ever heard it. "I saw Carter last week. He was at the grocery store, talking about his glory days, telling a cashier about the life he could have had." She paused, eyes scanning mine for a reaction. I gave her none. "He still doesn't get it," she said. "Still thinks he was pushed off the cliff. Not that he jumped." I folded the paper again, reached for a shopping bag. "He lost everything the day he underestimated me." I said, "He just didn't feel it until later." Brenda's lips pressed together. She didn't disagree. "I came here today," she said, "not to make amends. I know that window closed, but I wanted to see what he tried to claim, what he thought he could carry away with him." She looked around again, at the women browsing, at the calm, at the evidence. "You built this," she said. "Every inch." I waited, but there was nothing more. No apology, no redemption speech, just facts, delivered plainly. "Thank you for stopping by," I said, and I meant it. because her presence here, awkward, stripped of pride, was the final admission I never needed but somehow appreciated. She nodded once, turned, and left with the same quiet dignity she'd walked in with. Eva came out from the back as the door closed. I saw her. She said, "I know." She'd say anything useful, I thought for a second. She said she saw it now, that this was mine. Eva shrugged. Too little, too late, but still nice to hear. That afternoon, I made a brief speech, nothing rehearsed. Just me, standing near the register with a glass of cider, thanking our staff, our customers, our friends. I mentioned the early days working 16-hour shifts, Eva and I painting the walls ourselves, cold winters when we kept the thermostat low to save on bills. I didn't mention Carter. I didn't have to. Because when you've outgrown something, you don't need to prove you've left it behind. You just live beyond it, later that evening, after we closed. I lingered near the window, watching the last guests disappear into the twilight. The boutique glowed behind me, warm and full of light. A young woman approached from the sidewalk, hesitant. She looked barely 20, nervous eyes, wide and hopeful. "Hi," she said. "I don't know if you remember me, but I interned here one summer 4 years ago. You taught me how to fold scarves for the window display." I smiled. "I remember." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrap box. "I'm launching my own line. Just a few pieces for now, but I wanted you to have one of the first." I took the box. Touched by the gesture, "You taught me that preparation isn't fear," she said, "that trusting yourself isn't selfish." I blinked, emotion rising fast. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more than you know." After she left, I returned to the back office. I sat for a moment, letting the quiet settle. There, still on the wall, was the frame that had been with me through it all, the printed screenshot of Carter's message, "Have fun with your little shop." Below it, a second frame, one I'd added last year. It held a photo of our second location's grand opening, ribbon stretched wide, staff smiling, the mayor awkwardly holding scissors too large for his hands. Together, the frames told the whole story, the insult that once tried to break me, and the empire that grew from the pieces. Sometimes, when people leave, they think they're ending your story. What they don't realize is that you were never a chapter in theirs. They were a footnote in yours. I closed the office for the night, turned off the lights one by one, and stepped out into the cooling evening. The air smelled like cedar and the first whisper of winter. As I locked the boutique's front door, I looked at the reflection in the glass, not the abandoned woman, not the betrayed fiancé, just me, a builder, a protector, a woman who kept the receipts and turned them into a legacy.